I'm John Gormley. Thank you for checking in wherever we find you on another pretty gray Saskatchewan day. And as the cleanup continues on southern highways and byways, gosh, that snow hit through the day, Saturday night, all day Sunday, and even yesterday as the highways were then declared open and routine or normal winter driving. Some of those areas didn't look like customary winter driving. You still had one lane carved out of snow. So a lot of that will go today between the melting and highways crews that will get finally the roads cleaned all back, you hope, to the pavement. You've heard Dan McTeague before here. 17-year Liberal MP, the guy who founded a group called Canadians for Affordable Energy. He heads up that organization, watches gas prices, does a lot of great commentary, and we check with him all the time on gas price issues. He has mentioned many times the pending clean fuel standard. He calls it the second carbon tax. Well, his organization has commissioned some research on this. What will the clean fuel standard mean for your family? When will it take effect and the implications? We find Dan McTeague in Toronto today. Hey, welcome back. Great to chat.
Good to be here, John, and thanks for remembering. I've been worrying this is going to happen, and now it's taking place.
Okay, let's talk first of all on the timing. Clean fuel standard, what it is and when it comes in.
Yeah, so the Clean Fuel Standard is a second measure by the Government of Canada to reduce emissions, particularly from liquid fuels like diesel and gasoline. They originally proposed to include propane and natural gas and heating oils used for furnace and stove in the first round about a year and a half, 2 years ago. But we had mentioned that this was have a significant, devastating effect on most consumers, and not to mention cost-benefit analysis demonstrated that there would be a real problem with that in terms of more, the poor, those on fixed incomes, and of course, maritime provinces, notably Newfoundland and New Brunswick. The government did modify that, but is continuing down this road of ensuring that there is a reduction in emissions of liquid fuels such as diesel and gasoline, and of course, there are implications for that as well. Perhaps not as much as before, but the analysis provided to us by LFX Associates by noted economist Ross McKittrick has given Canadians, I think, a very sobering understanding of what Trudeau's second carbon tax is all about. And of course, it's important to mention, John, why it is a second carbon tax in the context of the fact that most carbon taxes are designed by economists as a signal to price efficiency. So you have a carbon tax in place that gets people to reduce their consumption, or we find alternatives and new technologies. Every economist that I know has always said that you do not layer that with more regulations. You don't layer that with other carbon taxes or other measures which could have the effect of destroying the first carbon tax. Very complicated, but at the end of the day, even climate economists would agree that this is something that no other country, to my knowledge, is attempting. If it were attempting this, it would certainly frustrate the efficiency of the first carbon tax. And of course, at the end of the day, lead to the unfortunate, as we found here today, that we will likely see no diminution in the amount of emissions. If we do so, it's only because we're really basically offering this to the United States. How they achieve this is simple. They blend a lot more ethanol in your gasoline. And of course, we know ethanol is much of it produced in the United States, even though the feedstock may come from around the world, including Canada. At the end of the day, it's not as efficient as gasoline. It means your mileage is certainly not as good, and emissions will continue to rise in the United States as they supply us.
Dan McTeague is with us. So why do they call this new tax a clean fuel standard? I mean, is it taxed differentially on, how carbon emitting the individual fuels are? Like, why the name even?
It's a false narrative. Certainly, the word itself is falsely semantical, and by that I mean we've already achieved clean fuel in Canada. Whether it's NOx, SOx, or sulfur, all these things that they're reduced in gasoline to the point that there has never been, certainly in the past 10, 20 years that I know of, any smog alerts created by of the efficiency of vehicles. It's just not an issue anymore. So use that sort of as a way of saying, if you don't agree with this, then you're obviously in favor of dirty fuel,
right.
Which of course couldn't be further from the truth. We're really talking about carbon emissions, though, at the end of the day. So it kind of takes away their point about the other emissions. They're only interested in one thing, CO2. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned, they're not going to see a reduction in CO2. What they will see is a pretty big, substantial hit to consumers for every working person by an additional $1,277, not to mention the fact that the Canadian economy will probably see a drawback about 1.3% in economic activity between now and 2030.
Wow. So $1,277 a year just on this new carbon tax.
Per worker. So if you have two people in a household working, now you can double that number. So we're talking $2,500 plus for average families with two workers. That's the statistics and the analysis and the data provided by LFX and Associates. And I think it's a very conservative view, because I think it could be much higher than that. John, so your listeners understand, one of the ways in which they will achieve the reductions, the emissions, is if you can't do it by blending ethanol, then you will buy carbon credits. And that carbon credit market is extraordinarily expensive. There's only one place in the world that I know that does it. That's British Columbia. Right now, that costs about 14 to 17 cents a liter, because carbon credits are running in the $450 per credit range. And according to the federal government's own regulatory information, impact analysis, RIAS, it works out to about, for every $100, about 4 cents a liter. Right now at $4.70, $4.60 in British Columbia. That means that we're looking at a 17, 18 cent a liter increase for diesel and gasoline. That's on top of the scheduled increase in carbon taxes, which by 2030 will add another 40 cents to the price of diesel and gasoline. And of course, it's not rebated.
Gosh, this is remarkable stuff. So the Clean Fuel Standard charge, is that already going on in this 2022 year? Or does it come later in the year? How do they roll it out?
It doesn't begin until July of 2023. So we have a few months before it starts to kick in. Refineries, including the one here in Saskatchewan, will meet that challenge initially by blending more ethanol into gasoline. And there is a bit of a cost to that, not a great one. In fact, it might be celebrated, people with pumping their fists in the air, hey, we built another ethanol plant, or here's where we're going to mix it, this is how we're going to do it. And it may not require a whole lot of capital to do it. And I think refineries will do that. But there comes a point in which that has a lot of diminishing returns. Sooner or later, you can't meet the 15% emission reduction. You have to buy carbon credits, and that's where the public is going to be on the hook, as it is for just about everything else, causing significant price rises well beyond the rate of inflation with the first tax, and now you have another tax layered on top of that. All told, I think it's fair to say that between now and 2023 and 2030, but I think more with the CFS 2025 to 2030, look for a total increase on diesel, for instance, of about 60 cents a liter and about 50 cents for gasoline. It doesn't really matter what happens in markets around the world. And last time I checked, the world is not moving away from hydrocarbons, energy like oil and gas.
Wow. So 2030, which we do tend to think of as a ways away, we're really dealing with 6 years and a bit.
Yeah.
An extra 50 cents a liter for average automotive gas.
Yes, and the number is important because, 2030 is 7 years away. Think of what you and I were doing in 2015, 2016. There was a new government in Canada at that time. It won't take that much time to get to that point, and it comes at a time in which Canada, which could be a solution to the world, as I've mentioned many times before, in terms of providing energy that is desperately needed, especially given the war in Europe, now finds itself not only burdened with much higher costs, a drop in our economic activity, no appreciable drop in global emissions for what we're about to do. We're now going to burden Canadians with what most will find as an intolerable price to pay. At the end of the day, I'm not sure that we can all, have our combines and mining vehicles and, our transport infrastructure, including rail, all done on hydrogen and battery. Certainly not by 2030.
Dan McTeague, former Liberal MP, the founder of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Had this report done by LFX Associates of Toronto. The Clean Fuel Standard, which rolls in next year, will cost the average Canadian working person, so you both going to work, $1,277 a year. You know, there are countries of the world, Dan, where the comments of Stephen Guilbeault, not that long ago, just this year in January, he's talking to the Narwhal, which is one of the environmental websites, in fact, open advocates. He says, my timeline to phase out fossil fuels is 2 years, 2024. So this is quote, in the next 2 years, more stringent methane regulations, zero emission vehicle standards, a net zero power grid by 2035, a cap on oil and gas, obviously phasing out fossil fuels. All these things must be in place in the coming 18 months. That was 11 months ago.
Well, it's lucky that we don't have politicians trying to reinvent reality, because that's not going to happen. And if it were to happen, one only has to look at what's happening in Europe today, to a region of the world that spent trillions of dollars to try to put all of its eggs in one basket. I mean, technology and science in reality does not support the timeline given by, Stephen Guilbeault and the Minister of Environment. Much as these kind of comments are being made, they're being done in abject violation and in complete indifference to the plight of Canadians, much less the realities around the world, in which the world needs more cleaner forms of fossil fuels, such as what Canada can provide. So, this is madness, and of course, he would only say it to organizations that are friendly to those kind of commentary. But I think to most Canadians, and increasingly, John, I'm seeing it here in Ontario, the cost of living now has overtaken all other issues, and as people realize that this game is not leading to an improvement in our quality of life, much less a reduction in carbon, I think more and more people are cluing to the fact that it's time for this gang and its friends to pack up and go, because their policies are completely out of whack with what is possible, the potential. We have to have policies based on reality, not based on aspirations and wonderful things that can't happen in the near term.
Always good getting caught up, my friend. Thanks for this, and we'll chat again soon.
We will. Thanks for having me again, John.